Cutman Press presents Devil Mountain, Book 2 in the Dana Mulder series. Written by N. Gray. Read for you by Michelle the AI narrator. Audio copyright 2022 N. Gray. Chapter 1. This story contains content that might trouble some readers, including but not limited to depiction of and references to suicide, sexual assault, violence, and murder. Please be mindful of these and other triggers. Practice self-care before, during, and after reading. As much as I've tried to stick to police procedures and correct terminology, I may have used my imagination a few times to make the story a little more interesting. Enjoy listening. N. Gray. Lifting my camera to my face, I watched my target walk into Tiffany's. My finger eased down on the button and took the shot. A few minutes later, he exited with a pretty pink bag in hand. I snapped another picture. I set my camera on the seat beside me, but before I could dial my client's number, my phone rang with a familiar name on the screen. "Hello, Dr. Adams," I said. "Let me guess. You've forgotten about our appointment today." I cringed in my car seat. To be honest, I had forgotten. I was so busy following my client's ex-husband to Madison, I'd forgotten all about my appointment with my therapist. "Yes," I whispered sheepishly as I watched the ex cross the road and climb into his car. Dr. Adams sighed so loud I could hear it as if he was sitting beside me. He wasn't happy. "Okay, I can fit you in at the end of the week." "Does that sound good?" he asked carefully. He was very accommodating. I'd forgotten my appointment once before, and he had squeezed me in. Previously, I'd asked to move sessions, and he always made a plan for me. I supposed once he knew what I'd been through, he really wanted to help me in any way he could. "Friday?" I asked. "Yep, say 4 o'clock?" As much as I didn't feel like it, I knew I had to go. Dr. Adams was a great listener and made me feel comfortable enough that I would open up and tell him what was on my mind. It didn't hurt. He was pleasant to look at. He had dark hair styled right, bright green eyes, and wore glasses when he took notes. He was professional and put me at ease whenever I felt like I was about to spiral out of control. The previous session, I'd left in tears. It wasn't anything he'd said but what I was going through. The nightmares of Pighead were still haunting me, and every time I spoke with Johnny, it seemed to bring everything to the surface, again. "Yeah, 4 o'clock is fine," I said. "Is everything okay?" he asked with concern in his tone. "Sure, it's all good. Thanks for calling," I said. "I have to go. See you on Friday." I killed the call before he could respond, and quickly dialed my client's number before Dr. Adams could phone back. "Please tell me you have something." Maddie cried into my ear, the stress of everything evident in her tone. I stifled a joyous laugh, trying to put myself into a good mood after my call with Dr. Adams, but failed miserably, and Maddie shrieked. "I got him, Maddie," I finally said, not wanting to keep her anxious. Maddie shrieked again. Her ex had been telling the judge he was bankrupt and unable to pay my client child support. She suspected he had hidden money during the divorce, and he had a new girlfriend by the time the proceedings started, which made her more suspicious. Now, with him going into the jewelry store, I suspected the new girlfriend was about to be his new fiancée. "What did you get?" she asked. He was walking out of a jewelry store." I winced as I said the words. I knew Maddie still loved her ex and was in denial after the divorce. If she knew he wanted to marry another, if what I assumed was correct, I wasn't sure how she would handle it, confront and attack him or continue with the legal route. "Are you sure you want the details?" "He's going to marry her, isn't he?" She sighed audibly. "I don't know." "Okay, it's okay. It's really okay. Send it to my lawyer and tell him to let me know what the judge says." I exhaled. That was the best thing she could do for her family. "No problem, Maddie," I said. "You just take care of your beautiful girls. Let your lawyer handle the rest." "I know you're right." "And Dana?" "Yeah. Thanks for helping me." "It's a pleasure. You doing this for me and for free has helped us. When the jackass starts paying, I will take you out for a lunch somewhere. That's perfect. You take care now. As I ended the call, it rang again. It was Johnny, my direct report when I had worked as an analyst for the FBI. We had kept in touch all these years and spoke at least once a month to catch up. I would even ask him for guidance on cases I was working, and he always obliged to help. It was strange he was calling again, since we had already spoken last week. For him to call again had to be urgent. Hey, I started. Dana. I need your help. What's wrong? It's not me. It's my sister. Chapter 2. I was on the road again, but instead of heading home toward Chicago, I was driving farther in the opposite direction toward Wisconsin. Something had happened at Devil Mountain, and Johnny needed me to go there. He had called and asked for a favor. His sister and her 2 daughters were camping, and when his mom couldn't get hold of her, they called the park ranger at Devil Mountain to search for them. They found their campsite, but they weren't there. Search and rescue had been called, along with cadaver dogs. His parents were not in a position to travel immediately, and since the violent attack by Pighead and his vigilante killers, Johnny had suffered a major spinal cord injury that could not be repaired and was left wheelchair-bound with a machine helping him breathe. Unfortunately, it made things difficult for him to get around and couldn't do certain things himself. He and his parents would fly from Florida as soon as they could, but in the meantime, he had asked that I represent him until they got here. Although Johnny had plenty of friends on the various police forces and in the FBI, I didn't have any of the red tape that came with it. He needed my help on this case, and I would be there for him. I drove slowly through the winding roads that would lead me to the ranger's cabin at the foot of Devil Mountain, which bordered between Wisconsin and Illinois. On any other day, the scenic drive would be wonderful. The tall trees on either side, the fresh air, and wild animals made for a great nature escape. Instead, the drive filled me with dread, not knowing what I was about to walk into. Would Olivia and the girls be found, and would they be alive? Devil Mountain during the winter months would be full of snow, ski slopes, and cabins full of people holding mugs with marshmallows and hot cocoa. While during the summer months, there were hiking trails, beautiful scenery, and spectacular waterfalls. Currently, the days were sunny, and the evenings cooler as we headed into autumn. Following the GPS directions, I meandered up a narrow road until I came upon a row of cop cars. I slowly drove past the cars until a man in a dark uniform flagged me down. Sorry, ma'am, but the hiking trail is closed for today. You can come back next week. I'm not here to hike, I said. The brother of the missing woman called me in. What's your name? Dana Mulder. The cop turned away from me and whispered into his radio. When he was done, he turned back to me. You still can't be here. He sounded unhappy with each word he spat. I felt the lines between my eyes deepen. Glancing at the officer's name badge, I grabbed my phone and punched Johnny's number. Have you spoken with Brent yet? Johnny asked hoarsely. The sound of his monitors flared to life as his excitement grew. Not yet, I said. Officer Bradley stopped me from going anywhere. Are you sure I'm allowed to be here? I asked loud enough for the officer to hear. Officer Bradley grunted in what I could only assume was dissatisfaction with the use of his name. Tell Officer Bradley that Detective Fletcher arranged for you to be there. I will hang on while you tell him. Officer Bradley, I said, officer, with an edge of sarcasm, Detective Fletcher is expecting me. Please, can you tell whoever it is you are speaking with on your little radio that I'm allowed to be here? Officer Bradley's jaw clenched and his mouth flattened into a straight line. I caught some tightening around his blue eyes as he narrowed them at me. I offered him my best blank face. He turned and whispered into his radio. Whatever was said to him made his face redden. His nostrils flared when he turned to me. He bent down and rested his elbows on my window. I leaned backward so my face wasn't right in front of his. Kindly turn around and park behind the other cruisers. Then you can walk back up here, he said in a low baritone. Thank you. I offered him my friendliest smile. I wasn't sure why I had received a hostile reception, but it came with the job sometimes. I was a female private investigator, and sometimes men in uniform didn't appreciate it. I pulled away with him still hanging on my window, but the moment the car moved, he stood and stepped backward. I could feel his glare at the back of my head as I turned my vehicle around. Only once I had parked and started the walk up did I notice the scenery. James and I should definitely hike here one weekend. Devil Mountain was part of a trust and on private property. The owners opened the trail and accommodation facilities the first week of every month. They charged a hefty fee, but they had to in order to pay a full-time ranger. Officer Bradley was nowhere to be seen when I reached the ranger cabin. Instead, a lanky man with short red hair, green eyes, and a friendly smile greeted me. "Dana," he said with an outstretched hand. "I'm Detective Fletcher. Please call me Stephen." When Johnny had first called, he had informed me he and Detective Fletcher had trained together many moons ago and kept in contact. He was also the lead detective on his sister's case. I guess Johnny did pull a string to get him on board and for me to tag along without any questions asked. Although it might answer the question why Officer Bradley was hostile toward me. Johnny must have phoned him after my little run-in with Officer Bradley. I shook his warm hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Sorry it's under these circumstances though." "What has Johnny told you?" His response was curt and to the point, but said with a pleasant enough smile and kind eyes. "Not much," I said. "Just that his sister and her 2 daughters are missing after they went camping." I shrugged and followed him toward the cabin. We entered the cabin, and Stephen handed me a bottle of water and a flashlight. "My team is currently processing the scene. When we suspected they were missing and couldn't get hold of Brent, Olivia's husband, I phoned Johnny." He slung his backpack over his shoulder. "After a thorough search of the campsite, we found her." "Is she okay?" I asked, scanning the cabin. "Where is she?" Stephen's expression changed to one that people reserved for funerals or delivering bad news, and my heart sank to my toes. The news would devastate Johnny and his parents. "What about the girls?" I asked, swallowing hard and opening the bottle of water for a drink. "They're still missing." "Oh no, and you haven't gotten hold of Brent yet?" I asked. I'd only met Brent once when I visited Johnny after the attack. He had been busy on a conference call and only waved at me in greeting. Olivia had been welcoming and her 2 girls were precious. One was 9 and the other 13. I'd visited Johnny again after that, and the 3 girls were there as well. They were a lovely family. "No." He shook his head. "We keep getting his voicemail." He reached for the door and opened it. "Do you hike often?" "Yes, quite regularly actually. My backpack is in the trunk." "Great. The more eyes we have on this, the better." Stephen and I exited the cabin and headed toward my car. James and I always kept our backpacks in the trunk of our cars just in case we wanted to go for an afternoon hike after work. But when I opened my trunk, I realized I had left my boots at home. My sneakers would have to do. Chapter 3. Stephen had mentioned their campsite was an hour-and-a-half hike up the mountain. Due to the tall trees and dense vegetation, we had to walk and could not use the helicopter. The winding path had taken us toward a stream deeper alongside the mountain with hundreds of trees and green vegetation. It was cooler in the shade as we neared the stream, and the sounds of water falling over rocks was therapeutic. Old trees had fallen to the ground and had started to turn a dull green-gray color. Stephen walked ahead while I glanced upstream where the trees were denser, and thick branches covered in leaves obscured something. Stephen wasn't walking too fast so I could catch up to him, but I wanted to know what it was. The closer I got, the more I realized someone was in the bushes. Shadows from the trees left me in a blanket of darkness, and I turned back to see where Stephen was. His back was to me as he walked farther away. "Hello," I called out. They didn't move. It looked like they had their back to me, sitting in a wall of leaves. Stephen had heard me yell and turned back as I approached the person, but they were motionless. Walking around it, I gasped and stepped backward. Hey, you found him, Stephen said and stood beside me. His smile reached his eyes. Do you know how long I've been looking for this guy? What is it? It's part of the trail, something fun for hikers to look out for. He sounded pleased. After all the years I've come out here with my boy, we had never seen him. You come here and find him on your first hike. He playfully slapped my shoulder. I reached to touch its face. Someone carved a man out of wood and left him here for people to find? I asked, admiring the wood carving. It was of a man sitting meditation style with his hand to his face and a finger to his mouth, as if remaining silent. Whoever had produced this piece of art had taken pride in their job. The detail was exquisite on the face, making it lifelike. Yeah, we think it's the same person leaving the dolls. My arms pebbled. There's dolls as well? You'll see them up ahead. He glanced at the high tree branches. A shudder ran through me. I won't lie to you, but this is a strange hiking trail. It's Devil Mountain, Dana. It's freaky, but at least it's pretty. Yeah, they hid him well, I said as I stared at the carving. We turned to get back on the trail. Is this the only one, or are there more of him? That way I know not to shoot the person if he was carved with his arm pointed at me. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Stephen chuckled. Apparently, there are 6 of them, but I have no idea where the others are. 6? I asked, not believing there were so many out here. If you find another one, your next drink is on me, he said jokingly, but then his demeanor shifted to sullen. We were heading toward a crime scene, our friend's sister's. I felt guilty for smiling and suspected so did Stephen. Birds flew above our heads, and I flinched at the sudden noise. They perched atop branches, whistling at neighbors. The trees were alive with crawling insects, and luckily there were no snakes from what I could see. I dusted sand and ants off the side of my pants, removed my backpack from my shoulder and had a drink of water. My feet already ached in my sneakers, but it was nothing compared to what Johnny and his family would be going through shortly. I was not looking forward to that phone call, but before I did that, I wanted to see the scene for myself so I could answer any of Johnny's questions. Once my backpack was on my shoulder, I beheld the scenery again as we hiked. I stopped dead when a head caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a child stuck high on a tree, dangling from a branch, but it was only a doll's head with one eyelid open and the other stuck midway, with stains smeared all over its face. I shuddered at the sight. Stephen chuckled when he turned to see why I wasn't behind him. Yeah, you found the first of many. They're all over this place. Whoever did it placed them so high, nobody has the energy to take them down. Don't let them spook you. I'm not spooked. It just caught me off guard for a second. I'd never seen such a thing while hiking before. The lines between my brows deepened. People do strange things when in nature. I'll bet. As we continued, I kept looking up in case there were more. I'd counted 7 doll heads in various states of deterioration. Some heads were chopped in half, others at the neck. The elements had dirtied and soiled them all. And none of the eyes worked. I felt imaginary insects climb up my arms. To break the silence, Stephen asked me questions. Do you have a place to stay, or are you driving back to Chicago tonight? Johnny has arranged a hotel for me. Stephen didn't respond, and the silence felt awkward, so I continued the exchange. Johnny tells me you guys trained together. I jumped across a stream and saw another doll swinging upside down, its white plastic hair stained with dirt and missing both eyes. Yeah, I applied at the FBI first, and that's when I met him. Unfortunately, I didn't make it and went into law enforcement instead. And we've stayed in touch since. It was terrible what happened to him, and what had happened to you too. Johnny got most of the beating, I said. And we lost 3 other agents that day. I was lucky they left me alone. But that man is still after you, isn't he? It had been 4 months since the shootout when James and I had hiked. James had been hit in the shoulder, and we suspected I had hit Pighead, and he too was recovering because I hadn't heard from him since. Forensics had collected blood at the crime scene, and we had assumed it was DNA, and Donnie had it processed. He had gotten positive hits on Cody's for samples found at 4 unrelated crimes, but there had been no positive match to the samples, until now. We could tie Pighead to these crimes, but we didn't know who he was. Even though Pighead wasn't currently after me, it didn't mean I could stop looking over my shoulder. Yeah, he is still around somewhere, I said, sounding deflated. And your boyfriend doesn't mind you going off on your own? How do you know who my boyfriend is? Detective James Michaels, isn't it? Yes. I narrowed my eyes at Stephen. Johnny and I speak regularly, Stephen said, as if that alone explained how he knew. What I didn't tell Stephen was Johnny and I had discussed my one and only case with the FBI. That was my reason at first for keeping in contact with Johnny. I wanted to find out what the FBI was doing about Pighead and his vigilante killers. Johnny had told me they were still under investigation, but after our attack, they had gone underground. The FBI had no idea who they were or what had happened to them. And there were no more murders attributed to the killers. It was as if they too had disappeared following the attack. The only reason I knew Pighead was still around was because of the gifts he'd sent and the attack on James and I. Johnny had said that when the FBI heard about that, they started the investigation again with a new task team, but he wasn't sure whether they would speak with me about what had happened, and I hadn't heard from them either, so I continued as if they weren't around. If anything was to be done about Pighead, it would be done by me. I couldn't wait for the FBI's assistance, but that didn't mean I didn't want to know what they had. Johnny and I chat regularly too, but I'd never heard of you until today. My life is pretty boring, he said. So there wouldn't have been anything for Johnny to tell you. My divorce is a common occurrence and nothing to write home about. I'm sorry, I said. It's fine, it's one of those things. Well, what? What does James think about you doing things on your own? Oh, that. Well, at first, we were worried that Pighead would come after me again. But after James was hit, we took precautions. But we haven't heard from Pighead since then. I heard people speaking up ahead as we neared the crime scene. Do you know James? I asked. Illinois and Wisconsin were big, but I didn't know if all the cops knew each other from different jurisdictions. We all heard what had happened, Stephen said. But I knew more than most because of what Johnny had told me. But I don't know James personally.